Hi everyone, Coffany Drop Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Arcade Fire album, We. Yes, this is a brand new LP from Canadian indie rock legends Arcade Fire, actually their 6th to date. A record that frankly I hoped would come through and turn around the slow downward progression that the group's discography has been undergoing since we transitioned into the 2010s. You know, the band really did kick things off with a 3-album run that most groups would kill to have. But after listening to We, I'm pretty convinced what's happened here is the group has created a very tepid mirror image of the first half of their discography. And you might be wondering, Anthony, how did they do it? Well, it's not through the bloated runtime, sloppy production, or forced disco nostalgia of Reflector, and it's also not via digging themselves even deeper into a dance music grave on their last LP, Everything Now, which came complete with a lot of forgettable commentary on our culture-starved, instantly gratified, on-demand dystopia. We disappoints in a different way. It's certainly not for a lack of social commentary. I mean, Arcade Fire typically does approach their records with some big ideas that they like to dissect, whether that be religion or suburbia. Now they sort of seem to be turning their sights toward the dire social conditions created over the past couple of years by the pandemic and a host of other things. So yes, another record from another major artist reminding us that all this shit kinda sucks ass, which is not necessarily a bad thing, especially if it's done well. Plus, over the past 2 years, there's been no shortage of blissfully ignorant pop. I kind of expect Arcade Fire to be the last band to do that, so now that you know, be ready to hear Win Butler crooning about rising anxiety levels and the end of the American Empire, across connected and episodic tunes that call back to classics in their discography like The Suburbs and Funeral. Or at least that would be one thing, if the instrumentation on this record was half as exciting as it is on those records. But really the closest thing we get to a thrill on We is the driving Springsteen-esque Americana as well as piano rock on the Lightning Parts 1 and 2. So if you've sampled those 2 teasers to this record, congratulations, you've heard the most exciting 5 minutes this album has to offer. The whole first half of this thing is a slog, so much so it borders on torture at some points. We have the opener Age of Anxiety 1 with its gently throbbing bass, glistening pianos, which set a dramatic tone for Win Butler's confessions of feeling like an alien in this anxious world where nobody sleeps. The track ultimately finds itself in an interesting place with Win describing crying meaningless tears and struggling to feel. The unintentional twist being that this vague rebellion against this not feeling very good time rings pretty hollow and yeah, doesn't bring a lot of potent emotion to the table. Age of Anxiety 2 Rabbit Hole does feel like traveling slowly down a rabbit hole. Very slowly. It's a mild little synth pop cut with a lot of sequenced bits cycling away in the background over and over. There's a lot of tension built up that's never quite released all that gloriously. And I get it, it goes on forever, and certainly there is a sensation of going deeper into this awful world that's been depicted on the opening track. I guess I wish it didn't feel so tedious in practice, or was just stronger in its condemnations and presentation, because frankly, Win Butler sounds like he's about to give up as he's between bars about Lambos and Chinese throwing stars. From here we hit my least favorite section of the album, that is End of the Empire Parts 1 through 4. The first of these 2 tracks is like an overly sentimental glam rock dirge, kicking things off very predictably as a spotlit piano ballad. The track's like a mix of McCartney, Randy Newman, and Bowie coming together into this utterly bland collision. Win Butler crying out in the lyrics about feeling uninspired, which I think is another moment where this record is telling on itself, because instrumentally, stylistically, this track is so just paint by the numbers. Like, this song has already been written before, we've heard this before. He's just kind of projecting his own vague feelings about the past 2 years onto it, whether that be related to a society or some kind of like, you know, isolation induced by the pandemic, or even a midlife crisis, which there's a few points here and there that that sort of seems to be referenced. There is something genuinely moving, though, about the song's closing moments, where Butler gets quite confessional, talking about how things have brought him to such a low point that he's really being driven to get high and drink more often, and also portraying being with someone in a romantic sense as being kind of like a refuge in the midst of all this. So there's definitely something in part 3 here for sure, but any emotion emotional momentum being built up is completely obliterated on End of the Empire Part 4 with, my God, I unsubscribe, this ain't no way of life, I don't believe the hype, fuck season 5. These have to be some of the worst lyrics I have heard this year. Like a very how do you do fellow kids type moment where we are trying to take a very hip, cool lingo and apply it to our tragic reality when the only thing truly tragic about this track is how telegraphed it is. Especially with all these filler cliches in the lyrics, which I sense Butler is leaning a lot more heavily on overall with this record. There's diamonds in your eyes, high on your own supply. Now, things do pick up on the Lightning parts 1 and 2, like I said earlier, tracks that when I first heard them, I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to hear them on their own. I'm most likely never going to hear these tracks again outside of the context of this record, but I will say comparatively they are the best moments here. It is a pick-me-up, and I do legitimately like the Lightning Part 2. And I do sort of see the purpose these songs bring narratively to the table, as well as the downtrodden vibes of the first half of the LP are now being contrasted with this thirst for life and survival, coming out of the shadows to bask in the glow of the lightning. And the band attempts to keep things uplifting through Unconditional parts 1 and 2, and there's some mixed results there, especially in Unconditional 1, where they go for this completely artificial and grossly bland commercial indie folk sound. Sounds like something you'd get more off of like a Lumineers or a Mumford & Sons record, maybe a little less plucky, but still. Point being, this is exactly the kind of stuff that Arcade Fire used to be a breath of fresh air from. So yeah, this track is a kind of tiresome, boring, flavorless, and very much a strong contrast from Unconditional 2, which is a synth pop and electropop anthem with Regine taking the lead on vocals, and honestly, like, my weary ears at this point are so happy to hear that change. Even if her delivery combined with the groove of the track and all the analog synth layers don't really amount to much more than what sounds like a The Knife song. Yeah, this is pretty much a song from The Knife. No real twist or angle to it or anything like that. Just sounds like a fucking song The Knife came out with in the 2000s. Which, again, I guess is better than anything in the first half, and the chorus is great too. But narratively, it does feel kind of weird to so suddenly be off-ramping all this agita that the record has been about, worrying about society and the future. But now that's moving into, hey, romantic love is pretty dope, right? And I guess to a degree it is true that love unites, but it just reads like such an empty platitude, especially on this record that is so desperately lacking in specifics. And the closing track, the closing title track, doesn't exactly bring a real sense of closure either, especially with the ending pretty much running like a cliffhanger. But the love that's presented on this track pretty much becomes an idyllic refuge from all the awful things that were explored on the first half of the record, which I suppose the blissful ignorance I was talking about earlier ends up being the point of this album. So there you go. I'm sad to say I feel like this record is about in the same league as Arcade Fire's last, and I didn't really care for that one either. I'm feeling a light to decent 4 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head, it's another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Arcade Fire, forever.